As I stand on this spot in south central UK, I can tell you that there are no railways in any directions for miles, and there have been no railways 10 miles to my north and south at least in either direction, and maybe 15 miles in either direction east-west. This is England, population 57 million, and if you include the entire UK, the population density is something like 280 people per square kilometre, and that includes Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. But here, on this relatively flat landscape in the south of England, are miles from the nearest person. Welcome to the story of why there are no railways here, just a bunch of abandoned roads. Have a look at this OS map dated between 1897 and 1907. It contains Shrewton railway station. Now if I zoom down the south and to the Isle of Wight, you'll also note that it contains a tunnel under the Solent. Now these two railways have one thing in common: they don't exist. Never have done in my lifetime and probably never will do. Now the Isle of Wight tunnels had test shafts sunk, but collapse led to abandonment, and any attempts thereafter faltered for the same reason. But here in Shrewton things were different. The story behind the abandonment of this railway, well, we need to head back to a time long before railways were even thought of. Just behind me is the parish of East Colston. That sits about 4 miles to the east of Westbury. With a confusing sentence. I'm heading up the hill to the south of that parish, and I'm looking for the first clue that this old routeway here was used a long time ago to cross Salisbury Plain. Maybe the first clue actually is the absolute mountain of different species in the hedgerows either side of me. That's not what I'm here to show you. What is just over the brow of this hill, if I've got my GPS right. The view up here is something else. Here we go. This is exactly what we've been looking for. This old milestone says XIX, so I guess that's 19 from Serum, XV 15, 16, 17 to Bath. That way 17 miles to Bath, that way 19 to Serum or Salisbury. Now let's go and find the next one. We should better predict what it says. Okay, so the next milestone should be around here somewhere, and it should say Serum 18, Bath 18, if that one was correct. I think the old maps, here we go, the old maps have got that slightly wrong. They've taken off a 10. Yep, there we are. Look at this. Absolutely brilliant old milestone. Now if we want to find the next one, however, there is a bit of a problem, which I'll show you just up ahead on today's little journey. You can look at the old maps on this route and follow it down to Serum. Now my assumption, perhaps like yours, is that this was the turnpike road because they would have used these milestones. Well, but this one doesn't appear to be on any official record. Now, if I want to carry on this old route, well, got a bit of a problem. You see, at this juncture here, I want to carry on going there, but I'm certainly not going to do that. Now some of these old milestones that we found, well, they date to 1750. And a bit more research, it turns out this route had the most romantic old name, the Old Slow Coach. So Salisbury Plain is split into 3 by the 2 narrow roads that seemingly survived here in the valleys. It's an area that looks like it covers around 25% of Wiltshire, but in essence the figure is actually 11%. By area, probably half of that is completely out of bounds for the majority of the year, and you'll probably have also worked out, if you didn't know already, that it's strictly for military use. But that still doesn't answer our question. You see, the War Department started buying up bits of land here when Railway Mania was at least 60 years old, so the assumption is that this barren landscape can't be blamed on the military. So where do we go from here? So there are no railways here, and maybe that would imply that there's a mountainous landscape, but it doesn't look like that. Maybe there's a lack of population here for the railways to serve. Either way, let's head to our south down the old Marlborough Road, because I think there's a few clues down here to help us unravel this puzzle. Okay, I lied. We're actually going to drive across this bit of the plain because there's quite a lot to see. Join us as we head south along the old Marlborough Road. Right, never done this before, never even considered doing this before, driving across Salisbury Plain. This bit is a byway, there's no restrictions other than the potential for red flags. Now this side of the plain is a bit different to IMber. The IMber side, 100% no-go unless you're going to IMber on the odd 1 or 2 days a year, but this side, this is different. You can go along the pathways, the footpaths, the byways, the restricted byways, depending on the time of day and if they're doing some firing. Now I haven't been online to have a look to see if today's a firing day, so if we find the red flags in the danger zone, which is on the map, then obviously we can't go any further and have to take a deviation. But at the moment we're looking good. We're travelling south across the old Marlborough Road. Okay, so as we tried to show you just earlier through the window of the car, Salisbury Plain, all aspects of Salisbury Plain are filled with all kinds of prehistoric stuff. Just ahead of me there looks like maybe an old burial mound, sort of probably Bronze Age, covered in white sticks and anti-tank concrete blocks. Across the road from there, something else, which gives us a hint of this road and what it was. So if I'm right, that is a milestone which should say Salisbury 13, Marlborough 14, in that direction. And there it is. Probably got a benchmark on it somewhere as well. Again, well looked after. Now it's worth remembering at this point that this is not my truck. I borrowed it for the day and I had no intention of getting it stuck here in the middle of Salisbury Plain. We came across some very deep trenches and there was something I wanted to show you, so I'm back on foot for a quick snippet here. Anyway, what we're doing is we're looking for the source of a river. That source of the river is going to help us understand a bit more about this old route. It's called 9 Mile River. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's called that because it's 9 miles long, but it's not. It's actually only 4.5 miles long. So I am at the lowest point in this landscape here, and I think this is where it's marked on the map as roughly the area of the source of 9 Mile River. Now, if you were one of your coaching staff and travelling south from Marlborough, that way up those trees through there towards Salisbury, well, if you reach this point, you're said to be 9 miles from Salisbury, and hence they name this 9 Mile River, despite the fact that it is only 4.5 miles long. So we do have a few road crossings on the plain, the mile markers give that away, and we do have a mountain of prehistoric activity there too, but no railways? Well, it turns out that wasn't for lack of trying. 1882, London South Western Railway came up with a curiously titled proposal, the Bristol and London and South Western Junction Railway. When I tell you the route of that, that kind of makes sense. Now, I'm not sure if that's what we're looking at up ahead, but we do have our first clue to a railway attempt to cross a plain. Now, the route of this line is hugely important because it would have left London South Western Railway's main line just across the field at Greatley, just this side of Greatley, cut across here onto Newton Tony, Shrewton, Chitton, IMber. We'll come to IMber shortly. North up through Westbury, Eddington, and then on to join a main line at Radstock. It doesn't take a railway historian to tell you that, well, GWR virulently opposed this. Effectively, this would mean that London South Western Railway had running rights to Bristol from Southampton via Andover. GWR clearly opposed this railway and were ultimately successful in blocking its construction. Well, that doesn't give us any clue really as to why this line was built. Perhaps a year later, 1883, when GWR came up with their proposal to cross the plain, maybe this is part of that. It turns out it wasn't. 1883, and they proposed a route across the plain from Pewsey down to Salisbury and on to Southampton. Doesn't take a genius again to tell you that this time it was time for London South Western Railway to oppose, because that would be right into their heartland. The top part of that line was authorised, Pewsey to Salisbury. It obviously wasn't built, at least as far as we know, perhaps because they were never going to get to Southampton. So what exactly is this bridge for? Was there a line here? Little happened on the plain for another decade or so. In fact, it took till 1896 for things to move once again, with one of the most important railway acts of that era, 1896, the Light Railways Act. And perhaps now we're going to get our first insight as to why that line was built, how far it went, and why was there a station at Shrewton that wasn't built but was on the maps. Over to GWR. If you're on a disused railway explorer, it's always worth turning up at places that you're not quite sure about, because, well, this isn't marked on a map, and yet I can walk up this old railway past Newton Toney. And the Light Railways Act made it really easy for railway companies to just build a line. There was less paperwork, less bureaucracy. They could just get on and build a railway fairly cheaply. And GWR in this area saw that benefit and took advantage of it straight away. They proposed a line that would go from Salisbury or Beilton on up the Avon Valley, again up towards Pewsey, cutting right across Salisbury Plain. This was a great plan. The Light Railways Act was in place. What could possibly go wrong? In steps London South Western Railway. All this time they've been busy thinking outside the box. You see, the War Office had been buying up huge swathes of land here on Salisbury Plain, and whilst GWR were making their own plans and involving the Light Railway Act, well, it turns out that London South Western Railway had been making plans with the very people that could indeed influence a line across Salisbury Plain. They'd been making plans with the War Office. So how far ahead did London South Western Railway think? Because their line was proposed from here just west of Greatley and on to Newton Toney, Amesbury and a terminus at Shrewton. Now, that is probably where the map we originally showed you comes into play, but why build a railway and stop just there? Perhaps, I guess, once you have a line that far, you can propose more, take more land, rail geography, and you may creep closer and closer to the goal that is Bristol. But that didn't happen. Their line only ever got as far, in a passenger sense, as Amesbury. There was a few more branches for freight to Bulford, Rolston, and even Stonehenge Airfield, but no line was ever built across the plain. So why no lines here? Why no life here? And when the War Office did buy up huge swathes of land here, well, railway mania had been around for at least 60 years, so maybe we should actually be looking at the landscape here after all. November the 1st, 1943, and the residents of IMber, the village in the middle of the western third of Salisbury Plain, were called to a meeting. Now, this meeting would change their lives more drastically than anything in the last 1,000 years of recorded history, and probably more. They were given 47 days to move out. The village was to be used by American forces to practice on street fighting. The residents gave little resistance. It was all part of the war effort and they were doing their bit. But above all, they would get their land and houses back. This was a promise. Now, there has been many attempts since that point to try and do just that. which have included testimonials from soldiers at the time, all kinds of evidence, including a copy of the original letter promising that they would be able to return to their homes at some point thereafter. However, it wasn't to be. You can visit the village on some gorgeous old London buses once a year, a couple of times outside of that for worship and reflection at the church, but that aside, you can't help feel the sadness at the loss of a community here. Of all the landscapes that we've visited, this one's relatively close to us and on our doorstep, and yet I stand here miles probably from the nearest person. No roads, no railways, no industrial revolution to change the landscape here, and perhaps that's the key to this video for me personally, and the journey that I've been on, finding these old routeways that would have been coaching roads, Roman roads like this one perhaps could have been. Well, maybe this is the one that's given me the most sense of what things would have looked like in an era. It's 2,000 plus years old, because we've got a lot of prehistory here, and maybe that above all is the reason why there is no development. Perhaps prehistory, perhaps 2,000 years ago, well, life pretty much stopped here with regard to the land and its potential for agricultural purposes. We're relatively high up on this plateau of chalk. Maybe that instead of many other reasons that have been suggested. I've been Paul. I really appreciate your watching, your viewership. If you want a bit more from behind the scenes, then you're very welcome to sign up to our Patreon or YouTube members and get you a few benefits here and there, and of course you'd be helping out the channel. I'll see you in the next video.